Hi, this is Tom. Welcome to my channel. If you're watching this, you probably got to hear from uh, from Twitter. So if that's the case, I suggest if you want to solve the problem, you can look at it on Twitter. I think that would be the easiest way. Here I'm going to go through how to solve the problem. So to solve this problem, the first thing that I would do would be to look for king moves, if there's any flight squares. And you can see that there's a flight square on D4. So the fact that there's a flight square in D4 suggests that the mate will involve moves such as bishop to F2 or queen along this diagonal from the other side. Queen to A7 or B6, or knight to F5. Looks like a possible checkmating idea, since it covers the square that the king is on in the D4. So those are, looking at these moves can help give us an idea about what's going on in the problem. So for example, I know that if black moves the bishop to D2, that's freeing the bishop of its responsibility over the D2 square, and then bishop to F2 is mate. So a thing to take into account is that the mating move is going to have to account for two squares, the D4 and the E3 square. I note that if the black pawn moves to E4, that frees the white knight of its responsibility over the E4. And so now knight to F5 is mate. And also another thing I note is, well, what happens if the king moves to D4? And then that would allow the queen to checkmate along the diagonal from the other side. So those are some things I note right away. And the second thing that I will look for in a mate 2 problem is to try to see if it's a threat type problem or a block type problem. So a threat problem is when you make a move that threatens checkmate, then black defends the threat, and then whatever black defensor is allows a new checkmate. That's the idea of threat move problems. Block move problems are waiting move problems, where white makes a waiting move, there's no mate. If black were able to pass, there would be no checkmate. But because black has to move, he's in Zugzwang, then there's a checkmate next move. So I note that this problem looks to be a block move problem as opposed to a threat problem. So I'm going to go on that assumption that I need to find a waiting move that will work. So one thing to look at here is just to go through all the black moves and see if there's a possible checkmate. So we can see that if black moves the bishop, there is. If black moves the pawn on E5, there is. What about if black moves the knight? Well, we see that if black moves the knight, sorry, I got the queen in the wrong spot. If black moves the knight to A4, well, then there's a checkmate on D3. And the same thing is true for if black moves the knight to D3 or D1. But if black moves to C4, there is no checkmate on D3. There's no checkmate at all. So that's something we have to account for. Now, if the black move on the black pawn on D5 moves to D4, then we can see also there is no checkmate. So there's two black moves that we need to account for. We need to find a waiting move that allows for mate on those two moves. So insofar as the black pawn goes, I notice that if we move the white queen to A5 or B5, if the black pawn moves, then queen takes E5 would be checkmate. So that looks possible. However, if black moves the knight to C4, there's still no checkmate. So that didn't work. So in looking at this, I can see that if there was some way to get to the D3 square, then that would be a way to defeat the knight to C4 move. If we had some other way that's not blocked by this diagonal. For example, if the queen can move to g6, then we could come in through the back door, and that would be checkmate. But clearly that doesn't work because the knight d6 is blocking the path, and we could try to move along the file, but we don't have enough move. The board runs out. We can't get to the d3 square. So there's no way to get to the d3 square. However, another possibility we can see is if we could get to the c3 square. That would also be mate, and that suggests the move queen to a1. We move queen to a1, the knight moves to c4, and queen to c3 is checkmate. Now, when you've been solving problems for a while, as soon as you see a move like this, then it's like, aha, because that's such a nice move. Queen to a1 is such a nice key move, and this is such a nice variation. Then it's very likely that you're on the right track. So against queen to a1, the other set moves work. We need to look at most of them work. There's an exception I'll get to in a second. If we get to d4, then we see that the queen takes the bishop. It's checkmate. So that defeats the d4 move, and the only set mates that don't move are the knight moves, because you'll remember that we had the knight moving, there would be a mate on d3, but here, if the knight moves, there is no mate on d3, since the queen can't get to d3, it's to c3, knight to e4 defends c3, that's not mate, but it allows queen to e5 mate. And the same thing is true, knight to d1, that allows queen to e5 mate. So that accounts for all the knight moves except for the knight to d3, and the knight to d3 doesn't allow queen to c3 mate, since it's blocking the path, and it defends e5 square, doesn't allow mate there. However, the knight is blocking the d3 square, which frees up the b4 knight, which allows a mate on d5, now that the knight is blocking the square. So this is a really nice problem, because it changes the set mate of the knight to not involve the d3 square. There's no queen d3 mate. Instead, there's 3 different checkmates that were set up by this key move. So it's a very nice idea, as well as I think that the mate to defeat the pawn move is very nice, that rather than the obvious solution, which would be the pawn moves to d4 and frees up the rank, you have the unobvious idea of the queen going around the corner and the black pawn blocks the square, and that is what allows the mate. So this problem, the date's unknown, it was composed by P.F. Blake in the field, and I hope you enjoyed watching this. Until next time.